It's early January 2026, and the world has just witnessed one of the most extraordinary geopolitical events of the decade. A dramatic, unexpected, and highly controversial shift in Latin American politics that has shaken global diplomacy. In the early hours of January 3rd, the United States conducted a major military operation in Caracas, Venezuela's capital, that culminated in the capture of President Nicolás Maduro and the removal of him and his wife from power. Hours after the assault, U.S. President Donald Trump stunned the world by announcing that the United States would run Venezuela, at least temporarily, until a safe, proper, and judicious transition could take place. To understand the full meaning of this event, we need to break it down, from the military operation itself to the political justifications put forward, to the legal questions and the worldwide reaction that has followed. Let's begin with what actually occurred in Caracas. Around midnight on January 3rd, a coordinated military strike, reportedly involving air support, helicopters, and special forces, hit multiple strategic targets in Venezuela, particularly in and around the presidential residence and military installations. Explosions echoed throughout the city, and within hours, President Maduro was reported to be in U.S. custody. The White House later released images showing him being escorted by authorities and flown out of the country to New York, where he is now expected to face criminal charges in a federal court. Trump's administration insists that Maduro was not just a political adversary, but a criminal, alleging his involvement in extensive drug trafficking, narco-terrorism, and corruption that extended well beyond Venezuelan borders. A superseding indictment in the Southern District of New York accuses Maduro, his wife Celia Flores, and several other high-ranking Venezuelan officials of using state power to facilitate cocaine imports, weapons dealings, and other illicit activities. Prosecutors say these operations enriched Maduro's inner circle and contributed to widespread criminal networks that touched the United States and Europe. Within hours of the capture, Trump held a press conference from his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida. Setting aside the traditional diplomatic language one might expect in such a situation, Trump declared bluntly and publicly that the United States would take temporary control of Venezuela. He said, "We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition." He claimed the move was necessary to prevent further chaos and to protect Venezuelans from exploitation by corrupt leadership or other actors who could fill the power vacuum. Perhaps most striking in that announcement was Trump's insistence that American involvement would extend beyond merely holding elections or facilitating negotiations. He spoke about U.S. oil companies working in Venezuela, rebuilding outdated infrastructure, and helping make money for the country. He also made statements suggesting that the U.S. might have a presence in Venezuela for an extended period and that there could be boots on the ground if the situation required, a phrase that hints at the possibility of a deeper military or administrative involvement. This move has obvious implications far beyond Venezuela's borders. Venezuela sits atop some of the largest proved petroleum reserves in the world. For decades, its oil industry has been a geopolitical focal point, with power players from Russia, China, and the United States, all seeking influence over its resources. Prior to this event, the U.S. had already ramped up pressure on Venezuelan oil exports through sanctions and blockades, dramatically reducing the country's ability to trade crude and crippling its economy. Now, with a U.S.-backed governance model potentially on the horizon, control of these oil fields and the economic influence that comes with them could hinge not on diplomacy but on direct political authority. However, the legality and legitimacy of this operation are deeply contested. International law is clear that one sovereign nation cannot militarily invade and capture the head of state of another sovereign country without justification. There was no United Nations Security Council mandate for this intervention, and there is no credible evidence that Venezuela posed an imminent threat that would justify such action under self-defense exceptions to the UN Charter. Legal experts have labeled the operation a violation of international norms.
some going as far as describing it as an unlawful act or even an illegal kidnapping of a sitting head of state. Critics point out that this event risks undermining the very foundations of international cooperation and law that have governed interstate conduct since World War II. They warn that if any powerful nation can unilaterally arrest, remove, and assert control over another nation's leader and governance without multilateral approval, the concept of national sovereignty becomes meaningless. This could have chilling effects on global stability, encouraging similar actions under the guise of security or humanitarian concerns. The final reaction on the global stage has been swift and heated. Countries across Europe, Asia, and Latin America have expressed a broad spectrum of responses, ranging from outright condemnation to cautious support for Maduro's removal, but concern over the method. Germany, for example, has called for a peaceful political solution and emphasized the need to respect international law. Meanwhile, Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has publicly denounced the U.S. military action as crossing an unacceptable line, appealing to the United Nations to take decisive diplomatic action. In the United States itself, reactions are just as polarized. Many conservative politicians hailed the operation as a decisive blow against narco-terrorism and authoritarian rule. Senators and officials aligned with Trump have praised the mission and defended the capture on grounds that Maduro lacked legitimacy and had been an obstacle to democracy for years. On the other hand, a chorus of Democratic and moderate voices in Washington, including prominent figures like former Vice President Kamala Harris, have criticized the operation for being illegal, unwise, and a dangerous distraction that undermines U.S. credibility in legal norms. They argue that this kind of unilateral intervention could entangle the United States in prolonged governance responsibilities and inflame resentment among Venezuelans in the larger international community. And speaking of Venezuelans, sentiment on the ground in Caracas and across the country is deeply mixed, which is perhaps unsurprising. While there have been scenes of celebration in some communities that detested Maduro's rule, there are equally powerful displays of defiance and outrage. Maduro's vice president was reportedly sworn in as interim president and issued fiery broadcasts rejecting the U.S. intervention, describing it as barbaric and vowing that Venezuela will never be anyone's colony. These reactions reveal the deep fractures that still exist within Venezuelan society, and they underscore that capturing the leader does not automatically translate to political stability or unity. Analysts warn that the real work and the real danger lies ahead. The United States may have seized a symbolic and strategic victory by capturing Maduro, but governing Venezuela, repairing its deeply damaged economy, and steering it towards a legitimately representative political system are altogether different challenges. Experts highlight that internal power structures in Venezuela, including military factions, political elites, and grassroots support bases for Maduro's party, will play a decisive role in what comes next. Some fear that without careful negotiation and involvement of Colombian, Brazilian, and Caribbean regional powers, Venezuela could descend into prolonged instability or civil conflict. There's also the question of the broader impact on regional geopolitics. Latin America has historically reacted sensitively to foreign intervention, especially by the United States, which has a long history of involvement in the Western Hemisphere, dating back to the Monroe Doctrine. This latest episode risks deepening anti-Western sentiment among leftist governments and populations. Countries like Mexico and Argentina have urged diplomacy and respect for sovereignty, while others have quietly supported the removal of a leader they viewed as oppressive, but not necessarily the means by which it was done. The net effect is a region forced to reconsider alliances, economic partnerships, and security strategies in a world where superpower rivalries between the U.S., China, and Russia are already intensifying. Critics of the operation also draw parallels to past U.S. military actions, from Panama in 1989 to Iraq and Afghanistan, pointing out that while the ostensible objectives of promoting democracy and stability were often cited, the long-term consequences were unpredictable and costly.
They argue that setting a precedent for regime change through military capture creates a dangerous template where powerful nations impose political outcomes rather than facilitating democratic processes and negotiation. So, where does this leave Venezuela, the United States, and the world? For Venezuela, the immediate future is uncertain. Maduro is no longer in the country, and his fate, now in U.S. federal custody, will be shaped by the American legal system, a prospect that was once almost unthinkable for a sitting foreign head of state. Domestically, Venezuelan institutions are in flux, and the interim government installed by the Supreme Court must contend with both internal dissent and external pressure. The narrative of sovereignty versus liberation will continue to be fiercely debated. For the United States, this represents a dramatic evolution in foreign policy, a bold assertion of power that defies international norms and invites scrutiny, both legal and ethical. The possibility of extended control over Venezuela's governance and resources raises complex questions about imperialism, national interest, and the role of military power in achieving political objectives. Some analysts argue that Trump's decision may embolden other powerful nations to act unilaterally on the global stage, potentially eroding the post-World War II framework of collective security and multilateral cooperation.
For the rest of the world, this event serves as a stark reminder that geopolitical stability is fragile, and international law exists in a contested space where power often trumps principle. The U.S. capture of a foreign president, an action that would have been unthinkable just a decade ago, now stands as a testament to shifting balances of power, rising nationalism, and competing visions of how global order should be maintained. As nations react, negotiate, and recalibrate their foreign policies, one thing is clear: the fallout from this event will shape global political discourse for years to come. In conclusion, the capture of Nicolás Maduro and the U.S. announcement to run Venezuela represent a defining moment in modern geopolitics, a moment that raises deep questions about sovereignty, legality, power, and the future of international relations. Whether this bold move leads to lasting peace and prosperity or spirals into sustained conflict and instability remains a question only time will answer. But one thing is certain: the world has entered a new chapter where old rules are being rewritten and the stakes are higher than ever.